members of this association, it's really redundant to want to introduce Zeo Lofren. She has been a supporter, a friend, a frequent visitor for many years. She's one of the key people who really understands our industry, our issues, and has an important focus and commitment to dealing with those issues in a way which is in the broad public interest as well. Zoe was elected in 1994, the only freshman Democrat west of the Rocky Mountains. But she had experience in Congress working for Congressman Don Edwards, who was also well known as a leader on some very key issues in our area. Zoe serves as the chair of the California Democratic Congressional Delegation of 34 members. She is a ranking member on House Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration, has played a leading role on the Subcommittee on Intellectual Property, Competition, and the Internet, as well as serves on the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. Her advocacy over the years, and I mentioned SOPA with Congressman Polis, is just one, but a very critical, outstanding role that she has played, it's just amazing over the years, from internet tax to competition issues, intellectual property. Zoe has always understood and been there as a leader. Immigration is kind of at the core of where she was, having dealt in immigration law and taught it in school at University of St. Clara School of Law, and has been an immensely important player in that effort this year. We're hopeful that will result in some meaningful legislation for the first time in many years. I'll stop. Zoe is a great member of Congress, and we are really pleased to have her with us this morning.
Well, thanks, Ed. I didn't get here to listen to everything that my colleague Jared said, so we'll see if we are predicting the same things. That he's certainly a very valued colleague. Ed is right. I am the ranking member of the Immigration Subcommittee, and I spend a huge amount of my time trying to pull immigration reform across the finish line. As you are well aware, the Senate has passed a bipartisan bill. We introduced that on the House side and recently filed a discharge petition, which I agree with. It's a rarely successful procedure, but it is a sometimes successful procedure. In fact, that's how campaign finance reform got a vote on the floor of the House, through a discharge petition. And we're urging Republicans who say they are for immigration reform to prove it by signing that petition. On the other hand, if they want to bring up some other set of bills, that's their prerogative. They're in the majority, we're not. And I am engaging in constant conversation with members of the majority, seeing if we can't get some consensus moving forward. As some of you may know, we had a bipartisan effort on the House side for 4.5 years. We met for 4 years in secret, and then for 6 months as a known entity, seeing really initially if we could just reach a meeting of the minds with extremely conservative members and Democrats who weren't so conservative to come up with an immigration reform measure. The interesting thing is we found that we could. We did actually draft a bill, but some of our Republican members, in my judgment, did not receive the kind of support they needed from their leadership, and I don't fault them for not being able to continue with the effort. They're honorable men. But, I mean, the bill is drafted and has been made available to Republicans who may be able to use all or some portions of it if we are able to proceed. There is an opportunity to move forward before the August recess, and there is at least some indication that that's a possibility. There's no guarantee. And so the issue for me is to make sure that there's enough dialogue so that there's not misunderstandings. And I know that this bill is going to be short of what I want. Frankly, the Senate bill is not that great a bill. It's short of what I wanted. I can accept that. We need, part of the art of legislating is, you don't get your way 100% of the time. You have to find compromises, and you have to be able to move forward. Having said that, there are some things that just cannot be sold on the Democratic side of the aisle, so it's important that there not be misunderstandings because of lack of communication. Obviously, it's a complicated issue, dealing with everything from 11 million people who are here in an undocumented status to engineers that we're forcing to leave as they're starting their companies in my home district in Silicon Valley, to family visa backlogs that go for half a decade, depending on where the husband and wife are born. It's a mess from top to bottom and needs to be fixed. And I'm hopeful that as we move forward, we at least have quality approaches to some of these issues. In the technology sector, I think that although the Senate bill makes some improvements, it could be improved upon a great deal. Darrell Issa is a member of the Judiciary Committee and has a so-called tech bill that I think could use a lot of improvement. I've told Darrell that personally, so I don't mind saying so publicly. If we're going to do a tech bill, at least it ought to be a good tech bill. And I think that your efforts to help in that would be very important and timely. Just a little bit on patents. I was the senior Democrat on the Judiciary Committee to work on the patent bill. Honestly, I think that, I work with the chairman when I can. We don't agree on everything. We agree on some things. I didn't think, had a very inclusive approach to this measure, and it almost crashed as a consequence, but we went in on a salvage effort, and we did get consensus, make some changes, including at the markup, that allowed Democrats to support the bill. And as you know, we got a huge bill on in the House, with some momentum over to the Senate side. They appear to be having some problems moving forward. I'm hopeful that they will be able to sort through them. Our bill was not perfect, and there are certainly changes that can be made, and we would still have an effective measure. On the other hand, to strip meaningful reforms from the bill, all of them would be a very unsatisfactory outcome. This is a problem that is bedeviling startups and innovators across the country. As you're aware, the political powers here in Washington sometimes align in weird ways, and the pharmaceutical industry and to some extent the universities have advanced doubts about certain provisions of that. I do think that the pharmaceutical industry and the universities are in different postures. There's been a recent study by a professor at Santa Clara University who indicates that biopharma is likely to be the next recipient of the troll lawsuits, so they should be alert to that upcoming possibility as they criticize this bill. Universities, some have suggested, have moved into licensing to trolls. I certainly would not want to say that publicly, but there is some concern if you take a look at some of the litigation that's going on, that although they are cloaked in the mantle of goodness as the university sector, in some cases some scrutiny might be warranted. I don't know that this is going to crash and burn. I think it's a very up and down process day by day, but I'm hopeful that Chairman Leahy will be able to pull it together and move it across the finish line. Just a couple of other stray items I've been working on, and then maybe some questions. I've been very concerned for some time about the surveillance issues that have been brought to the forefront by Mr. Snowden's releases. And obviously, there are issues of oversight by Congress. I will say this, that frequently the intelligence agencies will say, well, we fully briefed the Congress. And when I hear that, it's infuriating because, in fact, we have not been fully briefed on these matters. And I've never served on the Intelligence Committee, but the Judiciary Committee has primary jurisdiction over the Patriot Act, and we have very minimal briefing opportunities. And, when we do get briefed, obviously it's classified, but I'll just tell you this, if you get a yearly report of something and it's less than 1 page, how meaningful can it be? Jim Sensenbrenner, and I work with Jim all the time. Obviously, he's a very conservative Republican. I'm not. But when one thing about Jim is that he's a very diligent member of Congress. He's a serious legislator. And he seems, very concerned about this whole situation. And I think particularly so since he was the author of the Patriot Act. And when we saw how the measure was being used, he was, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he was, I think, both surprised and concerned. For example, I voted against the extension of the Patriot Act. Jim wrote it and voted for it, but the people who voted for the extension and who voted against the extension all believed that the inclusion of the word relevant was a limitation. And in fact, it has been used as an expansion of in a very weird understanding of the word relevant. And so we've got a bill that's comprehensive, and I think, not perfect, but a good solid effort. I'm a co-sponsor. I had a bill to allow for disclosure for people who are the recipients of orders, which Jim just took and put into the bill. It really covers all of it. And I do think, we had the Attorney General before the Judiciary Committee yesterday. It's not just him. Every Attorney General must take a course in how not to answer the question. But I think one of the issues that we need to wrap our minds around is whether the Fourth Amendment really is available to modern Americans in a digital age, given a series of Supreme Court decisions relative to expectations of privacy. I tried to get him to answer, and he kind of did, but it's something we already know, which is Section 215 is not limited to telephone metadata. It's any data, any business record, which would include, apparently, any information about web searches or any financial data, or on and on and on and on. Use your imagination. The doctrine of plain sight. You don't have an expectation of privacy if you walk out your front door. Well, that meant one thing 200 years ago. It meant your neighbors could see you. And it meant something else, 40 years ago, and you knew somebody could take your picture on a instant camera. Now, it means that you can be followed every moment of your life. Walk down the street, every ATM machine, every CCTV camera, soon drones. I mean, you are, yes, in plain sight, but do we really have an expectation that every moment of every day could be monitored, and then with facial recognition technology utilized with other data that's available, really to know every single thing there is to know about every American? I don't think so. And so I think we're at a time, it's going to take a number of years, and it's not just going to be the Congress, it's also going to be the courts, to come to grips with the idea of personal freedom in a digital era. And I do think it's not just the Fourth Amendment that we're talking about, but also the First Amendment. Because if you're of the belief that your every movement, every thought is monitored, I think that certainly has a chilling effect on your sense of your ability to speak freely or to associate with others. So this is a very important time in our country, I believe, to move forward. At the same time, Congress is not probably at its best in terms of dealing with issues. I'll just give you a tawdry example. In the DMCA, there's a provision, which is totally stupid, in 1201 that allows the Library of Congress to basically dictate technology. I objected to the DMCA provision when it was enacted. I've had bills over the years to change it and have a current bill to change it. But weirdly enough, the Librarian of Congress decided that Americans who have cell phones could not unlock them. And people who, it's not, most Americans don't spend their lives thinking about the DMCA. So, what the heck? I mean, all of a sudden, the Library of Congress is telling me how I can use the phone that I bought? And there was quite a big reaction to it. My bill actually provides the actual resolution of the matter by amending Section 1201, but Chairman Goodlatte had a narrower bill that basically just allowed the phones to be unlocked. As it turned out, that became unnecessary because the FCC stepped in with arguable jurisdiction, frankly, and managed to get the cell phones to be unlocked through agreement with the telecoms. But to be just a good guy, I decided, Bob asked me to co-sponsor his bill, and I did, and that was fine. We had a markup in the Judiciary Committee, made a few changes and the like, and Bob said we were going to put it on the suspension calendar. That was fine. And then the Saturday before we came back into session, I got an email from my staff saying that after the markup, after the bill had been reported out of the committee, there was a provision to ban so-called mass unlocking. I'm going, well, what is that? And if you look at it, basically for the first time, we would say as a Congress that you can use copyright law to protect monopolies. You could use copyright law not to protect content, but to protect business methods. Now, where did this come from? I don't know, but there are beneficiaries of this, and it would be the telecoms. How this got added to the bill at the last minute without any notice to the co-sponsors, and most of the members who were voting on it were not aware of it. I mean, it was kind of sneaky, I thought. And that's the kind of world we live in here in Washington, where, the special interests are wading in, sometimes coming up with situations where we're not advancing the cause of freedom, actually taking a step back, operating in secret, and leading Americans to question the utility, the integrity, and the mission of their Congress. I think that's unfortunate because so many of us really are trying to make an effort to make sure that the freedoms of the American people always come first. So with that, I'll stop talking at you, and I would love to answer a question or two. Who has one? Yes, sir.
So you mentioned the DMCA, and that triggers, of course, the bigger issue of copyright reform. Where do you see this process that's going on in the Judiciary Committee heading?
Not very far. We've had a lot of hearings, and I've gone to almost all of them, and some of the new members were suggesting changes to safe harbor, and I mentioned to the person sitting next to me, do these people not remember SOPA? I mean, and I think that especially people who didn't go through SOPA, PIPA, don't realize that we're not going to go there again. We're not going to go there again. And honestly, in the meetings I've had with the content people, they didn't ask for this. I met with the recording industry people, some artists, just last week, and they didn't ask for a review of. I mean, they have their beefs, that's fine. We all do. But they're trying to do collaborative deals with, the tech world. They're not asking for a big review of the copyright law for the most part. So I think it's an exercise that sometimes is interesting for those of us who are really nerdy, but I don't see it going very far, honestly. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's James Waterworth. I work for the CCIA based in Brussels. I just had one comment and one question. You were commenting on the reaction to the surveillance revelations of the last year, and as you will well know, they cause great concern also outside of the United States and present a challenge for technology companies, be they from the United States or elsewhere. But my question was actually probably something you get asked a lot, given your representation of the Silicon Valley area. We, the CCI, are currently involved in a project being done by a think tank in London, looking at how to build successful ecosystems. And I'm sure you get asked often, what's the secret
The
sauce?
secret sauce is Silicon Valley?
And I wondered if you have any brief points to share. You could probably talk all day about it, but any
Well, I
brief points
could.
to share?
I grew up in the valley, and, I saw it change. I mean, when I was a kid, it wasn't called Silicon Valley, it was called the Valley of Heart's Delight. It's the best soil in Northern California, and there were a lot of orchards. I think, looking back at the valley, there were a couple of things that are key. The valley would not have started except for Stanford University, and particularly Dean Turman at the School of Engineering. And I think that Dean Turman's role has, I think, sometimes been overlooked, not just because he was, a good engineer and it's a good engineering department, but his attitude about how you, as a university, work with the private sector is markedly different than some East Coast universities that also have excellent engineering schools. Stanford has, if you're at Stanford and you're collaborating with a company, it's seen as a benefit, as an appropriate thing to do. I saw recently a school in Georgia that had an engineering dean who was collaborating with a company and who was disciplined. So that's, it's a different mindset. The president of Stanford University is a wonderful guy, serves on the Google board. Is anybody saying that's a bad idea? No. In the Valley, that's a good thing. You've got competition, but you also have collaboration all at the same time with the same people. So that is a key, and it started with Stanford, but it's not just with Stanford now, where the really good universities are fueling and having interface and connections with the tech world in a way that is not usual. We have great weather. Everyone wants to be there, and so you've got people, it's an attractive place to be. We have, in my county, there's no ethnic majority. And in fact, nearly half the people who live in Santa Clara County were born in another country. And instead of leading to conflict, that leads to celebration. So I think that if you have an international flavor that people embrace, it actually makes it possible for smart people all over the world to come. I was at a session about a year and a half ago on immigration at a very high level, and at the end of it, one guy who was a brilliant venture capital guy, but who was Indo-American, he said, I'm leaving. He said, I cannot handle living here I think he was in one of the DC suburbs. He said, the racism, it's just, I can't live like this, I'm going to California. So that's, hey Anna, how are you? That's part of it as well. And I think once you've got a little synergy, then it builds on itself. You've got the venture capital world in Anna's district up on Sand Hill Road. So if you want to get something funded, that's where you go. You've got, you can walk to the bar down the street and there are other smart people sparking off each other. So it builds on itself. We have some challenges. Housing is hugely expensive, and we have, and that's really a private sector / local government effort to do that. But you go and there's a lot of cranes with housing being built, and of course transportation infrastructure also is a challenge. But we're working on that as well. And I think if we're able to maintain the environment where you can actually afford to live there, if we can get immigration working again, that the Valley just has a limitless future. Anything else?
Let me
Yeah.
just make a comment if I could.
Sure.
I remember back when SOPA was passing,
Yeah.
you and I had a conversation. And
Benny.
It stayed in my mind ever since, because you were extremely frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you conveyed to me that, they don't get it. They don't understand how this is going to be misused. And obviously Jim Sensenbrenner has seen the light in a big way. What about other colleagues? To what extent is there an understanding that there really was an expectation which has been exceeded so greatly. You referenced it briefly, but are members willing to now take the step to really rein in what has been such wide sweeping surveillance policies and not just do cosmetic?
I think so. I mean, let's go back and talk about just briefly what happened at SOAP. I see Anna, and I remember we were meeting in my office, and we wrote a letter, Anna and I think, did we get Jared to sign it? Jared as well? And we went out on the floor, and we got people to sign this letter. And I remember Rand Paul was running for president, and he was not very often there. I mean, I'm not criticizing, that was Ron Paul, his dad. And so, but he was there. So I went up to Ron, I said, Ron, they're trying to take over the internet. He said, oh, I'm against that. I said, yeah, me too. And so he said, let me take a look at this letter. And I thought, I'll never hear back from him. But an hour later, he came, he said, I'll sign the letter. It's like, great. So that sort of gave permission to a lot of other Republicans. And we just sort of built this support system. And on the committee, I mean, it was really grim. But we wrote over 100 amendments, as you know. I objected to the reading, the waiving of the reading, so give everybody time to focus on what they were doing. And but the real difference was, the roof fell in when we did the blackout. But we had, I was making my pitches to people throughout, and others as well. Dan Lundgren, I don't know, this is a private conversation, but I don't think Dan would mind. He came up to me a few weeks ago. And he was defeated in his election. He seems like a happy guy. He's got his grandchildren. I always liked Dan. And he said, I've spent a lot of time looking at those issues. He said, and they were absolutely right, those engineers. What we did didn't make any sense at all. So thank you, Dan. And he was somewhat helpful, too, during the whole measure. So it's a matter of just bringing in the education and then giving the political support. The Justin Amash amendment to defund the whole NSA surveillance fell 7 votes short in the House. If that were up again, I think it would pass. I mean, big time. So I think that there is a lot of enthusiasm for doing something about this. Now, down into the weeds on what that something is going to be, obviously not every member is spending their entire life looking at, all of the bills. But I do think that what the Intelligence Committee wants to do, it doesn't even go as far as what the president wants to do, and what the president wants to do is not far enough. So I think that we've got some momentum, and we've also got some leverage, because big pieces of this bill expire if they are not renewed. And honestly, I think if you put 215 up for renewal today, it would not get the votes to be renewed. So, Nancy Pelosi, who I admire so much, has a photo, not a photograph, but a painting of Abraham Lincoln in her office. And she sometimes in the middle of meetings will turn up, point to the portrait and say that President Lincoln was right. Public sentiment is everything. And we now have a situation where the public is fed up with this. I mean, when you take a look at, this is an unproven truth, but I think there's something to it. The ratings of the president are down, and people are pointing to the Affordable Care Act, that obviously the rollout was a disaster. I think behind some of the deterioration of old-time political people is NSA. Dianne Feinstein, who was the most popular political figure in California for decades, is now taking a big hit on her ratings in the polls. I think it's because of the NSA. You go out and you talk to any 20-year-old, they just think this is outrageous. And so that is percolating up, not in as dramatic a fashion as the blackout during SOPA, but that information is getting to members, and public sentiment is everything.
Do one last one.
I know, and I don't want to.
It's so hard, bookended so beautifully here. And my question kind of had confused a little FISA and SOPA.
Right.
But going back to the FISA issue, and I watching Senator Paul on this issue is fascinating, because he is taking a very libertarian view and has going out to the West Coast. He's
Sure.
making a plan for the youth vote.
Sure.
And I would think, I wonder whether you sense the Democratic leadership understands that part of the national vote of youth for Democrats has been as a party of the future, a party of technology innovation, and feeling more comfortable, and that's in jeopardy.
I think so.
If Democrats are not seen as the party really defending the internet, but because they own the administration, we own the administration, that's tagged with this defend with the status quo and surveillance, and I don't know how you get out of that box, but in fact, if Democrats cease to be the party of youth, future, and technology, it's troubling.
Well, I think, you're on to something. I didn't go to to Senator Paul's visit to Berkeley, but one of the observers afterwards said, he resonated with the young people who were there. He said, but no one asked him about gay marriage. So, great on technology, but the social dead weight of the Republican Party is going to prevent them from actually getting the support of the young people they want, and then they might get on this issue alone. What we might end up seeing is just young people disengaging, which would have a very serious impact on the political scene. I do think that every president, by the time the sixth year rolls in, aren't we all kind of tired of that person? And we're at that point. And that was true for people, everyone, really. I think the only one who got saved from that was Clinton, and it was the Republican impeachment that saved him. So, we're at that stage. Democrats didn't do that in the House, but we are unfortunately carrying that load. And the main thing for us is to do not just what's right politically, but what's right for the country in terms of a freedom agenda, a tech freedom agenda, a free speech agenda, and an agenda that nurtures the American spirit. And I think we all feel that. Before, I know she probably won't say this, so I'm going to say it about Anna before she comes up. Anna may end up being the chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee. Now, that would be an awesome step forward for the tech world and for the freedom world, and for consumer protection and for privacy. So I just wanted to mention how happy I am that Anna has thrown her name in the arena for that. And I know a lot of people in the Valley are trying to connect with Democratic House members to let them know how important that would be. I mean, that's a committee that is very future-oriented, and that Anna could lead it would be spectacular. So thank you for letting me visit with you.